Father-in-law bars the widow from her husband's wake. You are never welcome in this family. The security guard planted his body in the doorway of the funeral home, arms crossed over his chest, and the whole hallway seemed to shrink when Betty stopped 2 steps from him, eyes wet and breath short. I just want to go in and say goodbye, Betty said, voice caught in her throat. Family's orders, ma'am, the guard answered, firm. Whose orders? He was my husband, Betty asked, her voice climbing without meaning to. Get this woman away from the entrance, please, said Logan, Betty's father-in-law, cold as ice as he appeared from the crowd with a hard stare. Why are you doing this? You don't have the right, Betty shot back, anger held tight. Get out of here. You were never welcome in this family, Logan said loudly, the whole room falling silent. This is cruel, and everyone here knows it, Betty said, hands shaking. Respect the family's wishes, Logan said, flicking his wrist for the guard to block the way and shoulder Betty back. Stop. Don't do that to her, said Philip, the deceased's friend, raising a hand in a desperate plea. Stay out of this, Philip, Logan replied with a dry, threatening look. Cody would never sign off on a humiliation like this, Philip said, steady, reminding everyone of the dead man's wishes. Get them both outside. Now, Logan said, pointing to the exit without breaking eye contact. I'll go out on my own. Don't touch me, Betty said, pride bruised. In the hallway as they passed faces pretending to read texts, Betty felt the world slide off her chest and swallowed the sob. Take a breath. Let's get out of here, Philip said gently, edging his shoulder close without touching her. I can't believe I had to hear that at my husband's funeral, Betty said, mouth dry. There's something you need to hear, Philip said, fishing his phone out with nervous fingers. If it's one more humiliation, I don't want it, Betty said, eyes red. It's an audio from Cody, Philip said softly, tapping play. If my dad or Uncle Larry come after you, tell them I'm not backing off what I decided about the will, Cody's trembling voice said on Philip's phone. He talked about a will, Betty said, stunned, hand over her mouth. He did. And that was hours before the accident, Philip said, gripping the phone. He was afraid of his own father and uncle, Betty said, jaw tight to hold down the rage. They probably wanted him to quit changing something in the will, Philip said low, glancing around the parking lot. So he never got to change it, Betty said, anger stacking on top of grief. Watch what you say out here, said Mackenzie, Larry's daughter, appearing between 2 cars, face tense, eyes alert. What are you doing here? Betty asked, surprise and suspicion tangled together. I'm on your side, but they don't take their eyes off anyone for a second, Mackenzie whispered in a hurry. You know something I don't? Philip asked, trying to read the panic in her eyes. I know enough to tell you to be careful with both of them, Mackenzie said, flicking her chin toward the funeral home and stepping back. Can you prove anything? Betty asked, voice urgent. When I have something, I promise I'll help, Mackenzie said, and vanished between the cars before anyone could see her. This changes everything, Betty said, squaring her shoulders like she'd found a ledge to climb. If Cody was going to change the will, someone had a reason to shut him up, Philip said through clenched teeth. I don't think it's Logan. He wouldn't kill his own son over an inheritance. He's always been so protective of the family. Right, Betty said, gaze steady even with her face wet. I want to believe that too, but what we heard shows something is very wrong, Philip said, heavy-voiced, avoiding Betty's eyes. That night at home, Betty's phone buzzed on the table, the screen lighting up like a warning you can't ignore. Don't stick your nose where it doesn't belong, or we might pay your family a visit, Betty read aloud, breath hitching. With trembling hands, she grabbed her phone and walked out the door without thinking twice, knowing the only safe move was to show it to her parents right then. When she reached her parents' house, she parked in a rush and ran to the gate. Open up, Mom! It's urgent, Betty said, pounding hard, her voice breaking just as her mother appeared in the doorway. What happened? What's all this about? her mother asked, alarm on her face, already reaching for the phone in Betty's hand. I got an anonymous message. Someone's threatening you, Betty said, voice shaking, clutching the device like it burned. Do you have any idea who's behind it? Her mother asked, eyes welling. I think it might be Logan and Cody's uncle, Larry. They were trying to pressure Cody into not changing something in the will before the accident, and now they think I'm digging and they're threatening you to get to me, Betty said, indignation weighing more than grief. That's coward's work, Betty's father said, lips pressed tight as he fought to stay calm. I need you to leave town for a few days and tell no one where you're going, Betty said, with a steadiness that surprised even herself. Do you really think that's necessary? Betty's brother asked, uneasy with the decision. It's the only way I'll feel safer to deal with this, Betty said, urgent and honest. Then we'll pack right now, her mother said, gripping Betty's hand with fierce tenderness. Be alert about everything and don't answer unknown numbers, Betty said, pointing at their phones. Take care of yourself too, please, her father said, hugging her brief and tight. I promise I will, Betty said, walking them to the gate. When the gate clicked shut and silence fell, Betty drew a long breath, stared at the empty room, then picked up her phone and dialed Philip, certain she couldn't waste time. I need to go to Cody's office first thing tomorrow, Betty said as soon as he answered. I've got a key because of the files we share, Philip said, straight to the point. His calendars, drafts, any clue about what he was about to do could be there, Betty said, not hiding her anxiety. Then we go early. No attention, Philip said, already building the plan. Morning came, and the empty street seemed to approve the urgency with which they approached the office. Here's the key. Go slow, Philip said, handing her the keyring, steady hand, eyes scanning the street. When the door swung open, the smell of paper and dust filled the air, and memory hit Betty at the sight of Cody's favorite mug still on the desk. Middle drawer. He always kept drafts there, Philip said, pointing like a man who knew his friend's habits. Found the calendars, Betty said, pulling out folders and leafing carefully. Show me. What did he mark? Philip asked, leaning across the desk. Look, 2 dates at the clerk's office with the notes, make sure everything goes to Betty and review will, Betty said, voice tight but eyes fixed on the page. That's a trail, Philip said, bracing himself on the desk, breathing heavy as the confirmation hit him. I'm photographing every page. If he tried to change anything, the clerk's office will have a record, Betty said, sliding the papers into an impromptu envelope, rage and pain mixed. Next stop is there, Philip said. The clerk's office opened busy, the line built to grind down courage, but Betty's focus left no room for fatigue. Helen, a low-voiced, tired-eyed clerk, looked up when they reached the counter. Can you check if there was a will revision request in my late husband's name? Betty asked, passing over a document. There is a request on file, Helen said, typing fast, eyes barely leaving the screen. And what happened with that request? Philip asked, alert to every detail. It was closed automatically when he passed, Helen said, a flicker of discomfort crossing her face before it vanished. Could you give me the dates and the protocol numbers? Betty asked, polite but taut. I'll write them down, Helen said, scribbling dates and numbers on a folded slip. Thank you, Betty said, taking the paper like grabbing a rope on a cliff. Let's talk outside, Philip said, nodding toward the door. On the sidewalk, air hit Betty's face, a mix of relief at having rails to follow and fear of where those rails might lead. Now we know where to dig, Betty said, opening the slip to double-check the numbers. Put that away. I'll send you the draft photo so we can cross-check, Philip said, pulling out his phone. Just then, a dark car rolled up slowly, window gliding down. Save yourselves the trouble, Logan said, wearing the smile of a man sure he'd just killed a move. How did you know we were here? Betty asked, stomach going cold. Those numbers aren't going anywhere, Logan said, reciting the exact date Helen had just written. Say that again, Philip demanded, indignant and disbelieving at once. You still don't get it? Nothing happens without me knowing, Logan said, resting his elbow on the window, calm as ever. Only one person knew these numbers just now, Betty said, voice hard as she slid the paper away. You have no idea who you're up against, Logan said, raising the window like shutting a door in their faces. He knew it all, right then. The same dates, Philip said, scanning the street as if he could see invisible wires. It wasn't chance. The clerk gave it to him for a reason, but it doesn't matter now. Let's go back to my place and cross-check everything, Betty said, anger rising as the car pulled away. At the apartment, she spread papers and photos across the table, trying to sort the pieces. Her phone buzzed, cutting through her thoughts. An unknown number flashed. Pick up. Could be important, Philip said carefully. It's me, Mackenzie. I need to talk to you. Not on the phone. Now. Somewhere quiet, said the rushed voice on the other end. We're ready. Just tell us where, Betty answered, steady, breath short. I'll send the location, hurry. I can't stay long, Mackenzie said, hanging up before questions could land. Silence held for a few seconds, then a notification vibrated with an address. Minutes later, they pulled up where she'd pinned. The street looked too ordinary for the weight they carried, but Mackenzie's tense eyes, appearing between cars, made clear this wasn't a casual meet. I don't have much time, Mackenzie said, breath short, placing a phone in Betty's hand. Whose phone is this? Betty asked, feeling the weight of it. It's my dad's, and it's got everything he hides. Chats, audio, photos, receipts. I saw enough to know you're not wrong, Mackenzie said, voice tight, eyes always sweeping the area. Do you understand the risk you're taking? Philip asked, cautious. I do. That's exactly why I can't stay, Mackenzie said, hugging Betty hard. Thank you. I know this will help, Betty said, grateful. Don't call me. I'll reach out if I can. Be careful. They don't stop, Mackenzie said, backing away fast. On the way back, the car felt too small for the load they carried. When they arrived, they locked the door and finally breathed. Let's kill the phone's internet. No chance they track it, Philip said, calmly switching off data and removing the SIM. Hook it to the laptop and copy everything. I'll watch the door, Betty said, anxious. There's a chat with Logan about blocking the change, and another with the mechanic about giving him a scare, Philip said, opening the first audio. And the others? Betty asked, heart rattling with anger. There's an audio where Larry talks to the mechanic about swapping out a part in the car. Same night, early morning, Philip said, pausing the playback with a sharp click. Open the photos Mackenzie mentioned, Betty said, leaning in. Larry's car, side dented that same night, a repair receipt time-stamped in the middle of the night, and a toll receipt, Philip said, flicking through image by image. These tolls match Cody's route. Check the times, Betty said, writing everything down. It all lines up. Toll time, shop time, the audio about swapping a part. It's a straight line, Philip said, showing the screen with tense fingers. This is what we needed, Betty said, teeth set. You've got a text, Mackenzie, Philip said, pointing to Betty's vibrating phone. Mackenzie says her dad figured out she took the phone and he's sending her to a ranch. She can't help from there. I texted back thank you and promised this would be over soon, Betty said, throat closing as she stared at the screen. No reply coming. Then we act with what we have. Fast, Philip said, pocketing Larry's phone. They spent the next hours in silence, organizing evidence. Now we've got 2 flash drives with everything, one with me, one with you. If something happens to one, we've got the other, Philip said, handing Betty one of the drives. This is what puts Logan and Larry against the wall, Betty said, putting it away. Days dragged by, glances through windows, quiet steps in the house. Then Philip's phone rang, slicing the silence. Logan's calling you. Pick up, Betty said, arms folded tight, eyes on the phone. Philip drew a breath and answered, pacing a few steps, listening in silence. His face hardened with each line from the other end. He hung up. He wants to meet in a parking lot. Now. Just him and me. To end this, Philip said, returning to Betty. Tell him you'll go. I'll hide between cars. I need to see his eyes when he talks. Betty said, cold forged in pain. When they arrived, the lot was nearly empty. Betty slipped out fast, tucking herself behind a car, while Philip stayed visible as planned. Minutes crawled like hours until tires echoed. A car rolled in, stopped a few yards away. The door opened and Logan stepped out, smoothing his coat, calm as ever. Let's end this. I'll give you as much money as you want, but you hand over everything you've got, Logan said, the calm of a man who thinks he can buy anyone. I'm not for sale, Philip said, firm. Think it over. You still have time, Logan said, lifting his chin in a threat. If that's all, we're done. I'm leaving, Philip said, turning to go. Then two men jumped out of another car and slammed Philip onto the hood, hard enough to wring a groan. Let him go, now! Betty shouted, sprinting from her hiding spot. The two attackers exchanged a look and backed off, sprinting to their car. Logan was already moving away. Get in. I'm taking you to urgent care. The cops can wait, Betty said, speeding off, eyes bright with rage. I'm fine, just a cut and a lot of anger. We're going to the police station to hand over what we've got, Philip said, breathing tight in the passenger seat. If you're sure you can handle it, we go, Betty said, steering for the station, heart heavy. Minutes later, inside the building, the air of the place weighed on them as they approached the counter. Betty turned over the evidence and asked that everything be formally logged. The officer checked it all, made copies, and gave them written confirmation. Betty walked out feeling the air a little less heavy, knowing the evidence was now secure. Now I can breathe and plan the next step, Betty said, thoughtful, looking at Philip. What's the next step? Philip asked, knowing there'd be no rest until justice showed up. In a few weeks, there's going to be a memorial service for Cody, and I'm going to say everything I know in front of everyone, Betty said, resolute. You want to do that alone? Philip asked, surprised. I want the police to walk in the second I'm done talking, and for that, I'll give them a heads up on when and how, Betty said, steady. When the day came, the packed hall pressed down on Betty's shoulders as she walked to the front with the evidence in hand, adjusting the microphone with a stubbornly trembling hand. I'm asking for a minute in Cody's name, Betty said, voice firm. You're not putting on a scene here, Logan said, stepping forward, venom ready. I have something to say about the accident, and I can prove it, Betty replied, holding his gaze until he blinked. Let her speak. She has that right, said one of Cody's relatives, standing and facing Logan, tiredness in his face. My husband was trying to change his will, and the accident was caused by someone who wanted to stop that, Betty said, the room holding its breath. This woman is insane. That is obviously a lie, Logan said, trying to smother the tension with swagger. Then show the proof you claim to have, another relative said, raising a hand. I'm putting this on speaker, Betty said, tapping her screen and lifting the phone, so Logan's voice filled the room, talking about blocking the change. That's doctored, Logan said, trying and failing to laugh it off. Now Larry's voice, coordinating with a mechanic to fix his car before dawn, just hours after Cody's crash, Betty said, letting the second audio hang in the air. You have no right to expose private conversations, Larry said, lunging with a handout as if to snatch the phone. Step back, now, Philip said, gripping Larry's arm to stop him. Here are the shop receipts from the very night of the crash, Betty said, opening the folder and showing copies to the front rows. Here are photos of Larry's car, dented the same night, Betty said, turning the pages so no one could pretend they hadn't seen. Here are toll receipts, stamped along Cody's route, Betty said, reading aloud like hammering nails into boards. This proves nothing. "You're making it all up," Logan said, already winded. "And this last audio is from Cody, saying if anything happened, it was because they wouldn't let him change the will," Betty said, turning up the volume, letting Cody's voice cut through the sanctuary. "That's enough. I'm taking that phone," Larry said, lunging again with a swing that found no target. "Don't even try. I said you're not touching her," Philip said, planting his feet and blocking him. "Listen, sirens," Betty said, because the sound already carved through the air like an answer right on time. "Nobody move," an officer said, entering with others and locking eyes on Logan and Larry. "This is abuse." "I haven't done anything," Logan said, hands up in a theater no one bought. "You're under arrest. The evidence was logged ahead of time," the officer said, snapping on the cuffs as cell phones rose like witnesses. In the days that followed, the investigation moved fast. With the evidence on file and the promise of lighter sentences, Logan and Larry admitted what they'd done. They confirmed Cody had been about to change his will to leave everything to Betty, and they'd pressured him for weeks, calls and meetings, until it was clear he wouldn't back down. Then they planned to give him a scare, and the attempt ended in a fatal crash. Investigators also found that Logan, through contacts in the clerk's office, got alerts about any move Cody made, which explained how he knew the protocol numbers. Mackenzie, who had risked everything to hand over her father's phone, was pulled from the family ranch and placed under protection to testify. With the material officially recognized, Cody's intended change of will was restored, just as he'd already noted in his papers. Logan and Larry were sent to trial not only for what they'd done to Cody, but also for the threats against Betty's family. Days later, Betty walked to her husband's grave with Philip at her side. She carried the closed folder against her chest, not as a weight, but as an ending. She set it on the cold stone, breathed without hurry, and let the silence speak. There was no triumph. There was justice. And where they'd tried to silence a voice, what remained was the certainty that Cody had finally been heard. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. See you in the next story.